There you go. That's a little better. It is great to have you all here. I got to tell you, first hour was pretty funny because, it was basically a service at like 7:15 in the morning. And I was actually surprised how many people came out to it. Maybe we need to do a sunrise service. Who knows? But no, it was good. And then last night with the storm rolling through and the kids up and down and trying to fall asleep. But God shows up and he does great things. And I love that all the way around. And I think that today should be a good day as well. We are in week number 2 of our series, The Upside Down Kingdom. And when I say the word every week, so like when we have a series, we'll have this meta idea that we want everything to kind of be built off of, this foundational thought. And the phrase upside down kingdom is really important that we get this. The upside down kingdom is a phrase some scholars use to describe how the values of God's kingdom are significantly different than the values of this world. We're going to talk about this or say this like the first minute and a half of each of these sermons over the course of the next couple of weeks. We're going to remember this. The upside down kingdom is a phrase scholars use to describe how the values of God's kingdom are significantly different than the values of this world. Let me give you some examples. Some of these we're going to cover in this series. Some of them will actually be in a series yet to come. But here are a couple of examples of this. To become a leader in God's kingdom, you must become a servant. Matthew 20, 24 through 28. To truly find life, you actually die to yourself. Matthew 16, 24 through 25. You respond to your enemies with love. Matthew 5, 43 through 44. To become truly rich in the upside down kingdom way, you actually must become exceedingly generous. Luke 6, 38. To find your own let me say that again. Set your own well-being aside for the needs of others. So if you want to be whole, you want to be complete, you actually have to set some of that aside and pay attention to where other people are at. 1 John 3 and actually much of that chapter and beyond. So when we become followers of Jesus, we begin to live by another kingdom's values. And this whole idea of the upside down kingdom is so massive. When people walk into the doors of the church, they should not just come into a different place where every culture, every tribe around the world where they gather to, but it should be a whole other kingdom, a whole nother set of values. It's an experience that should stand in stark contrast to the rest of the world externally. With this in mind, let's pray, and then we'll jump into this week's. Lord, I pray that you be with us. I pray that I would do nothing more than make you ever more famous and known today. I pray that your words would be lifted high as we exegete this text, as we walk through John 13, this whole concept of a different kind of power where you are washing the feet of the disciples. I pray that we would see ourselves in this story. We would see you primarily in this story, ourselves even from that. And then, Lord, even ask kind of the homiletic hermeneutic question, then where do we see ourselves today because of what we've learned? I pray that your nature would be exceedingly made clear. I pray that what is of you would stick. God, anything I say that is not of you, that it would just disappear and it would be forgotten. I want what is transcendent to be honored and owned in a deep way today. In your name, Lord, amen. John 13:35 is a text that I have come across many times, and I've even heard people use it. It says this: by this all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. In our modern day, this idea of loving one another is not a problem. It really isn't. The problem is we don't know what love one another actually means. In our modern day, we believe that love one another means I want you to support whatever I want to do. So if you love me, or if there's love between us, what I want from that is you to support whatever I want to do. Let me give you a couple examples. There is a lady years ago that Leslie and I we would meet with her, talk with her. She had all kinds of spiritual questions. It was actually a really, really good for me to spend time, where Leslie and I to spend time with her. She would have been kind of your normal Western, non-church going, but very religious person. So didn't go to a church. She wasn't even Christian necessarily, but she had definite passion for spiritual things. She kind of would have been like a modern day hippie, for lack of a better way to put it. And so she would always have all these ideas, all these questions about life and meaning and value and where does this come from. Very much a follow your heart, get before, the Mother Earth and spend time in prayer and kind of figure out where your heart is, way into like the spiritual side of yoga, trying to find your heart, find that peace, find that inner. Just this really interesting person. And I think she represents a lot of people even in America today, these like spiritual seekers. So in a conversation with her, she was talking about how we need to follow our own heart, pursue our own heart, and she was down with the Bible. How will you know that you're my disciples? By your love for one another. I think her grandpa used to take her to church when she was a kid. She's like, see, even Jesus is good with this. We're supposed to love one another. And by love, she meant, let me follow my heart. So we started talking about examples of this. And she even had one in her own family. So in her own family, I don't know if it was an uncle or a cousin, I'm not sure the connection exactly, but there was a father with one child and a wife. The father decided that he didn't love the wife anymore and actually had fallen in love. I believe it was with a secretary, if I remember the story right. So the dad comes home one day and says, I'm out of here. You know what? You let yourself go physically, wife. I don't like what you're doing here. I don't feel like I love you anymore. And this other lady, my heart has gone out to her, and I'm out of here. And I said, okay, well, let me pause on this story. So would the right thing to do, hang with me, would the right thing to do be that, or would the right thing to do to get this lady and her son and sit down, get on one knee, and look that little boy in his eyes and go, be proud of your dad, that you won't see him much anymore. He's chasing his heart. Wife, be proud of your husband. He's chasing his heart. We should celebrate this. Is that the right thing to do? Let me give you another example. Follow your heart, chase your heart. What does it mean to really love or show love to other people? Another one would be this. How many here, I'm going to ask this in church, I asked it in first hour and nobody raised their hand. How many here watch MMA? I watched MMA when I was in college. Watch any of the MMA stuff, check it out at all? Everybody's too afraid in church. I don't know if that's godly or not. If I raise my hand, does my tithe go up? How does that work? I don't know. Is there a punishment for this? I'm kidding, right? But in this, MMA, for those that follow it, you'll be aware of this. There's a guy by the name of Fallon Fox. If you know MMA, you probably are aware of this guy's name. Fallon Fox was a very mediocre MMA fighter. He wasn't all that great at it. And he had this massive revelation one day. He's like, man, you know what? I think I'm supposed to be a girl. So he literally comes out and says, I am now a girl. And he, before culture, he's going, listen, I feel like I feel called to be a girl. This is who I am. It really is my heart. And I want to fight women. So he gets put in a cage, MMA fight cage. He is literally beating women to bloody pulp and sending them to the hospital. Well, millions of people cheer it on. And he gets tons of money for it. What does culture do to this? How do you respond? Is the right thing for me to do to go to the bedside of these women that he's literally beat up? If you're a women's rights person, what do you do with this? You've worked so long to make sure that there is equal treatment, and now somehow the most archaic, barbarian beating of women were to celebrate somehow in the name of right action and right. How do we land here? Would the right thing for me to do then to go to the bedside of these girls that he's literally beat to a bloody pulp that are in the hospital and sit down and go, you know what? I know this is painful, but we should celebrate the fact that he's now following his heart, or she's now following her heart. Let's be proud of this. Dude, culture is crazy confused trying to figure all this out. So what do we mean when we say, by this all people will know that you're my disciples if you have love for one another? What in the world does love one another actually mean? What does it actually mean? John 13, 1 through 17 is going to be our text for this morning, which we already heard. But I want to take it apart a piece at a time as we exegete it. The first section, John 13, 1 through 5, let's begin there. It says, now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. During supper, the devil had already put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him. Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands and that he had come from God and was going back to God, rose from supper. I want to pause there for just a moment. The first part of this is just really solidifying the idea that Jesus is king. All of this authority, all power. I mean, in your mind, I want you to imagine this even in your mind. The way it's written in Genesis, in the beginning God created. In fact, in Hebrew, the word Elohim is plural in that statement. So like these non-corporeal sentient beings, Jesus, we believe or scholars believe, and I believe as a pastor, that even in the plural statement of the creation of the world, that the Father, the Son, the Spirit, Jesus has been around and a part of this from the very beginning. He can literally bring life out of dust. The most powerful being that's ever walked on the planet, Jesus is there, present. This guy with all this authority, all this power, the text is setting him up as this massive, powerful, everything is in his hands king. And then we land to verse number 4. He rose from the supper, he laid aside his outer garments, and taking on a towel, he tied it around his waist. Then he poured water into a basin. Imagine that. To wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel that was wrapped around him. Now in this, man, and if you haven't started this yet, get into, this goes along with the whole sermon series, not just this one, but the next series too, this devotional through John. You're going to pick up even more in here that I don't have time to go on to on a Sunday morning. If you haven't started the devotional, get one. They're at the resource center in the back. You can grab one after church. This goes into it clearly. But what we find as we study through John is the first chapters, 1 through 13, are like all of these little glimpses. It's like a movie giving an oversight of the life of Jesus. A little glimpse here and a little glimpse there and a little story here. And all of a sudden when you hit chapter 13, it's like the whole story slows way down. And then they start marking every little detail. And then all of a sudden, all these little conversations, all these details become really clear in verse 13. And this detail of story, the slowing down of the story, takes Jesus all the way to the cross. John wants his readers to really, really see everything is setting the stage for this moment in the upper room with the disciples. That is the beginning of the story, slowing way down in every detail leading to the cross. This is a huge deal in the greater book of John. This section of Scripture is. The upper room. The upper room would have probably looked more like this. It would have been food set out around a table that would have been actually low to the ground. So it wouldn't have been sitting up. They would have most likely not been in chairs. It's very likely, for those that like their history, that they would have been on probably soft cushions. And it's highly likely, this is the way they would often eat, they would lean on their left arm. We see this in a lot of ancient pictures, a lot of ancient stories when they talk about the Roman era. They would lean on their left arm, all heads facing inward around the table, and they would eat with their right arm, with their feet all pointing out towards the back. Now, there are a couple things that are important to note from this. One, when a foot washing was to take place, so let's say that a servant was to come, and sometimes it didn't even happen at dinner time, often it would be before, but if it did happen and their feet were being washed, it gave these people the ability to ignore the servant that's doing it. All of these pictures where it has somebody like sitting at a table and they turn to the side of the table and they look at the servant as the servant's washing their feet, that's not it, man. This servant could be totally ignored as he would wash the feet of the people where they were laughing and enjoying dinner together. Turns toward them. This picture even here is more intense when we understand that the meal they were undoubtedly reclining, not sitting at, with their heads facing the center and their feet stretched out behind them. They supported themselves on one elbow, most often, primarily the left, and reached for food with the right hand. The participants of the meal could ignore the washing of the feet or the person that was washing their feet. Now, Crossway Study Note says this really well. Jesus washed all of the disciples' feet, including those of Judas. Jesus' act is all the more remarkable as washing people's feet was considered to be a task reserved for non-Jewish slaves. Okay, so the way the text sets this up paints Jesus as the one who has all things in his hands. He is the most powerful being alive on the planet ever. The king of the world. And the king of the world takes on a role, non-Jewish, somebody that a type of culture group they would have looked down on, and a slave at that would have taken on a role that would have been even ignored, a role that could have been ignored to serve the needs of the people that were there. So they're all talking, they're hanging out around the table. Jesus gets up, he ties a towel around his waist as they're all talking, and he goes to their feet, away from their attention initially. With this in mind, let's start in verse 13, verse 6. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, Lord, can you imagine this? Imagine this in your mind. Simon's sitting there, he's eating, he's talking, he's laughing. Jesus gets up, ties a towel around his waist, and comes over to Peter's feet and starts to wash his feet. And Peter turns around and he's like, Lord, do you wash my feet? Jesus answered him, what I am doing you do not understand now, but afterward you will understand. Peter said to him, you shall never wash my feet, because it's a role reserved for the last, the lost, the least. It's the slave of culture. Jesus answered him, if I do not wash you, you have no share with me. Simon Peter said to him, all right, fine. That part I added in. That's not in the Bible. Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head. Jesus said to him, the one who has bathed does not need to wash except for his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean, but not every one of you. For he knew that who was to betray him. That was why he said, not all of you are clean. A couple of things from this. Lord, are you going to wash my feet? That was not merely a question. It was more like a challenge based on a confusing set of circumstances. It did not make sense to the disciples. Why are you doing this? No one here has more power than Jesus. And another way to say it is, no one here has more power than Jesus. And Jesus took on the least role, which means no one here contains enough influence, wealth, pride, power. Nobody in this room has enough of any of those things that gives you the ability to abstain from serving, even in some of the most menial roles, if it really is going to help. I remember years ago when I was doing my undergrad at Oklahoma Wesleyan University. I was studying philosophy and religion there. And I got asked to be, I used to be a worship leader. So I don't know, none of you have seen me lead worship. I used to lead worship a ton, play guitar, led worship. And it's every once in a while I get to bust the old guitar out and play with the kids. It's fun. But when I was in college, I was a part of a team that went out and led worship at camps all around the United States. So we travel around a lot. It was awesome. Our band's name was Cry of David. It was cool back then. And we would go from camp to camp to camp. All around the U.S. I don't even know how many camps I've been to. Just leading worship, speaking to kids. I enjoyed it. It was so much fun to do. And I remember at one camp, I think we were in, it was either Minnesota, Wisconsin. I can't remember where we were at for sure. But I remember going to this camp, and I'm the worship leader there with the band from the school. And during one of the sessions, the speaker wanted to do a foot washing service. Have any of you ever had your feet washed in a service before? Let me tell you, that's interesting. And so I'm there, and I'm the worship leader. I can't get out of this. Part of me is like, dude, I just want to run into town and go to McDonald's. It felt so awkward to be a part of this. And so I'm there. I felt like I couldn't do it. So the service starts, and as the Lord led you, you're supposed to go to somebody else in the room and wash their feet, just as a symbol of saying, I'm aware of you. I see you. I want to care for you. I love you. And so I'm sitting there, I got my shoes on, I'm waiting for this all to happen, and one of the guys in the band that played with me in the band, he comes over and he takes off my shoes and he starts washing my feet in front of all these people. Let me tell you, that's kind of weird. It's kind of awkward. It does feel funny to have that happen. And so I'm there, and this dude's washing my feet, and I'm like, okay, this spiritual moment, God, you got to speak in this somehow. And part of my brain is like, Christians are a weird group of people, and I'm one of them, so count me in with the weirdos. It's all good. And so this is all going down, and as I'm getting my feet washed, it just hits me, man, how though it would have been more culturally common to have this done in that day and age, because it was done by somebody so down and out, I absolutely, in a little tiny way, kind of understand why Peter felt so awkward. Though it was more common back then, it was still a role that Jesus shouldn't have done according to Peter. And to have that kind of thing done to you, boy, I tell you what, I get it. I mean, I can't blame Peter. I think I would have been in the same boat. Like, what are you doing? With this in mind, I want to continue in John 13, 6 through 11. Or I want to continue here with this even further from 16:11. Peter's pious stance, just a thought, Peter's pious stance as being above this or thinking that Jesus should be above such a role will stand in stark contrast to his demeanor after his denial, or after he denies Jesus. It will be a humble heart willing to receive love and willing to offer it that will be the railways for him to continue the mission of Christ. Let me say it like this. Real biblical love is not merely an outcome. Man, this is so important. Real biblical love is not merely an outcome, but a posture of the heart. Yes, what is produced matters, but it begins with a proper posture, humility. And Jesus begins to demonstrate this heart of humility to his people. And I also want you to think about this. Jesus washes the feet of Peter and Judas. They are both about to betray him. I mean, think of the nature and the heart of Christ. Even on the cross, like you find this in Luke 23:34, even on the cross, Jesus will hang there, been beat to a bloody pulp, sitting, literally hanging there in front of the people that have betrayed him, that have turned their backs against him, that have called for his death, and he says to them, Father, forgive them, they don't know what they're doing. I mean, the amazing thing to me in all of this is Christ's hand of love is offered to anyone who has a repentant heart willing to turn into the love of Christ. John 13, 12 through 17, when he had washed their feet and put on his outer garments and resumed his place, he said to them, do you understand what I have done to you? He literally is trying to get them to get the significance of this. You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for I am so. If I then, your Lord and teacher, again, he's establishing the power and authority that he actually has. If you then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet, each other. For I have given you an example that you also should do just as I have done to you. Truly, truly. So basically, this is a big deal. I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor a messenger greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. I'm going to invite Josh up, and we're going to pull these ideas together and come to a close in a few moments. C.S. Lewis is one of my favorite authors, as you know, and I quote him a lot. I mean, it's not a Mike sermon if I don't quote Lewis, Chesterton, or Tolkien in some way, like I like those guys. And they all highly influenced each other, at least Chesterton did, Lewis and Tolkien for sure. But there's this concept in all of their writings, and when I say it, those that have read like Chronicles of Narnia or The Lord of the Rings or watched the movies don't do as good of a job of it, but it's in the books really strong. There's this concept of further up, further in, all through the writings. In fact, one of my favorite places where it's played out is in The Last Battle. Anybody here ever read The Last Battle, C.S. Lewis's The Last Battle, Chronicles of Narnia? If you haven't, you should read it. I've read it, honestly, I don't even know how many times. And the way he portrays heaven is crazy to wrap your brain around. I love it. So the way this plays out is when the war is over, right? I mean, literally, the main character in the book has given his all the way to the end, and the world comes to an end, and he's standing there, still even breathing hard, holding his sword, and he's in a place of peace. And I imagine this in my mind when I read through it. It's like he's dropping his sword, you stand, peace all around. But see, heaven, in the way it's written in the book, is not like a box. It's not like a cage and there's nothing outside of it and you just have to live inside of this. The way heaven is painted by Lewis is heaven is always a further up and further in. It's always being made more and deeper and bigger and better. I mean, love creates. God is a creative God. So even as our universe is growing, heaven is a place that is always growing, always getting bigger, always expanding, always becoming more beautiful. Now, The Bible talks about a kingdom in heaven, like an actual city. I'm talking beyond that, the actual eternity itself, always growing, always expanding, further up, further in. And so all through these writings, whether it's Chesterton or Lewis, right, or even Tolkien, right, the way he paints Middle-earth is it's a story that's progressive, and there's always another age and a deeper age and a further one, further up, further in. The story gets better and better and better. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And so with this idea in mind, Lewis believed that the pursuit of God always has more levels that take one further up and further into the glory and grace of God. With charitable love, the first few steps may look like this. Okay, so what I want you to do is I want you to think of this. Yes, when you accepted and trusted in the ways and work of Jesus Christ, something happened, an event took place. You become a child of God. By charitable love, you became a child of God, adopted into his family. That is a true statement. But it was also the beginning of a much bigger and greater adventure. One that gets even bigger after this world is done. See, I think when we pass away, this is massive. I think when we pass away, we don't get into eternity and we're exhausted and tired, though that guy initially was and drops the sword. The way Lewis paints it, I think, is right. He actually takes a deep breath, and though you may be old and your body may be worn out and you may be tired and you're physically exhausted, in heaven we breathe deep youth and health and vigor and excitement. There is an efficacy in heaven and an effectiveness of life that is full and vibrant and real, and it's deeper and further in, and God wants to take us further into his glory, experience it in an even deeper way. And spiritually that happens too. So when you think about charitable love, I want to walk you through the love that's demonstrated by the washing of feet, further up and further in, further up and further in. So the steps might be this. You become a Christian, and you all of a sudden begin to become very aware of how selfish your heart is. Entitlement, I deserve, me, it's all about me and what I can get. And you're aware of that, and so you have a shift from selfish to selfless. You begin to see this in your heart, a shift towards selfless. But see, that's not the end. There's a further up and a further in. So maybe then compassion, right? So selflessness turns into compassion for the needs of others. Now all of a sudden, and this is written specifically to the body of believers, the way we ought to be living our kingdom, not just externally, but even internally. Now it's compassion. So now on a Sunday morning, when you walk into church on a Sunday morning, you're not thinking, is this entertaining? You're thinking, what are the needs of the people around me? You come to church to be a participant in God's kingdom being played out, not a judge and observer of it, not a critic of it. I really, man, the more I study, and I get, part of this is the fact that both my parents have been professors, and they're really intelligent. I come from a line of thinkers, so I love church history. I really loathe the way some of the church has played out in the West, where we put on a show, and you come to be entertained and then evaluate whether you thought it was good. That is not the way church was designed at the epicenter launch of it. It was a community of people doing life together, serving each other's needs. Selfless. And from selfless, you begin to notice the needs of others, but there's a further up and further in even from that. Charity offered, right? So now we go from compassion to those in need to actually charity being offered. It moves from heart to hands, because many of us Christians, we have that change of heart and we are thinking selfless and we do have compassion for others, but not to the point where you're actually going to do anything. And the further up, further in is a compassion to the point where it moves from your heart to your hands, and you actually do something for those in need around you. But there's a further up, further in yet again. Charity offered at a level that it costs you materially. See, a number of us, the way we do charity is we're charitable and we love and we offer our time, talent, treasure. We offer, our giftings, how God has made us, what we're good at. We do it, but only in the margins that don't wear us out. My wife got in a car wreck a couple of weeks ago, And so it ended up totaling the car, so I bought a car this last week. And let me tell you, buying a car, it just makes me sick to my stomach. It feels like it's just money out. It's not an investment, it's just money out. And so as I'm writing the check and I'm getting all the stuff set up so I can start making payments on it, I'm talking with Leslie on the phone, and we even sat down together before I finalized it all. And I'm like, okay, can we make space in the budget for this? Can we afford it? Is it going to work out okay? We're having these conversations internally, and we have to build our budget around getting this new car, which I still don't have yet, but that's not for this sermon at all. And so I'm jumping through all these hoops to get this all done. I got to make space for it. And then it hit me. Have you ever sat down and been that strategic with something charitable? Like you actually had to change your budget around and think about how you might do something charitable? Like now you don't just give out of the excess, but you have to actually make margin in your life. I mean, a single mom who's barely making it and barely surviving, and you sit down with your spouse and go, is there any way we can carve out $250 a month to help her out or get her back on her feet? And you have to redo your budget. It actually costs you something because the charity that saved us cost us something. It cost us something. And so the further up, further in is now you're going to rearrange your life to offer love to the people that are in need around you. But there's a further up, further in yet again. It can go deeper. Charity offered at a level that costs you materially, and the next one would be charity offered that costs you pride or your pride. Here's what I mean by this. Jesus, the King of the world, purposely chose the lowest of roles. And he says, you do this with each other too. There is nobody in this room that is above changing a diaper, picking up trash, whatever it might be. Pride of superiority cannot exist in the upside down kingdom. You are not above it. Nobody in this room is smart enough, rich enough, influential enough to be above any task that's needed in this church. And by church, I mean the people. But there's a further up, further in yet again. It always goes deeper. And I'm going to end. I thought of a number of these, but I'm going to stop with this next one. Further up, further in. Charity. Now, this is going to depend on personality. Plays into this a lot. But for me, this is a big one. The further up, further in. Charity received openly. A humble heart knows it needs from others too. You remove yourself from a place of superiority. So here's how this played out in my life. I'm going to be real transparent for about a minute here. I am Enneagram 3, Ian, was it ENTP or whatever it is? I'm the achiever, leader, driver. I love helping people. I have been going to soup kitchens and helping out since I became, even in high school years. I love to go down and serve in a soup kitchen, help those in need. I love giving to the people that were poor. I came up with all kinds of crazy things I've done over the years for even people begging on the side of the road. I love to help people. It's fun to help people. But it's really hard for me to receive it. About 3.5, 4 years ago, the Lord really convicted me in my heart to take the posture of somebody in need. And that really punches at my pride. I love to be the helper. I don't like to be the one that needs help. And the way that the Lord really convicted me a few years back is open yourself up to counseling. I really felt that strong in my heart. And so through some connections in the church, I got connected with a counselor here in the area. He was a retired pastor, an amazing guy. I really respect him a ton. And I basically sat down for counseling. On my way to meet with him, I just felt knots. It was like getting my feet washed all over again. It's like, this is awkward. I don't want to do this. This feels like it's supposed to be for people that have big, messy problems in their life. What am I doing? I like, it's just all rolling through my head as I pull in. I walk in, and honestly, the first conversation went something like this. I don't entirely know why I'm here, other than I feel convicted in my spirit to take a posture of humility, to be willing to receive, let people speak into my life. You come highly recommended. You're a passionate Christian. And so I just am going to allow you to ask any question you want. You can ask about what I'm reading, studying, what I'm watching on TV. You could even ask about the sensual parts of my life, my marriage. There is no part that is off limits. You can ask me any question you want. Probe my heart. So for the next number of times, man, just let him ask questions and work me out. And I found places in my heart that really needed to grow that I wasn't even aware of. And my own pride kept me blind to it. And I'm telling you, the further up, further in for me wasn't just helping people, seeing that people need or have needs, helping people at a level that I actually have to make space for it. I mean, my wife and I have done some really big things over the years for people, but then a whole nother level yet again is letting myself be a recipient of it. Then I go back and I see Peter, the king of the world, makes his way to his feet, starts washing his feet. And initially he's like, what are you doing? This is not your role. This is not what should be happening. And you contrast that with the receptive heart that he had when he was being reinstated after he denied Jesus. A massive heart of humility that says, I also need the gospel preached to me. There's always a further up and further in. So let me pull these ideas together, and I'm out of time. The upside down way. The true unifying agent is not control over. I want to pause at the first part of this thought. Remember John 13:35, how will they know that you are my disciples? What is the mark of an actual church? The true unifying agent is not control over, but a deep compassion for others, a desire to serve each other. In our modern world, man, you could go from whatever, North Korea, to even ways in which we do things in the U.S. The way we want people to get along is through control. I'm going to make you do things, whether you like it or not. I'm going to control you. I want to control what you say, control language, control speech, control. Think of it this way. The most powerful being that ever existed, the one who spoke all of this into life, into being, right? God himself, the way he built it, he could easily snap his fingers and take all of the decision power that you have away from you so you only make right decisions. Sometimes I think that would be nice. But the person who actually has all control showed that the right binding agent is compassionate, sacrificial love. He has the ability to do it any way he wants, and this is the path he chose. And as Jesus washes the feet of the disciples, he says to them, this model of engaging with each other, you do this with each other. The upside down kingdom, the binding agent is compassionate love. Okay, so let me sum it up with this thought. When somebody walks in the doors of an actual church, not an entertainment hub where they do Christian things and play Christian music, but an actual church, a coming together of the believers of Christ. When people walk into an actual church, the way they do life ought to appear significantly different than the world externally. When you show up on a Sunday morning, we talked about this just a minute ago, you show up on a Sunday morning and you walk into the doors of this as a Christian, you ought to not come to be entertained, you ought to come thinking, how can I help the kingdom of God be more real, more tasted, more seen, more felt? How can I walk through the doors of this place participating in the kingdom of God coming to life? I want to pray, man, even as you come to church, Lord, open my eyes to the needs of the people around me. Let me see where they're at. Let me see where they're hurting. Let me see where they're broken. And Lord, you put in my heart places where I can wash their feet, where I can meet their needs, where I can help them out. So when somebody externally that is not a believer comes and steps foot inside of an actual church, an actual kingdom-centered church, they ought to walk in and go, wow, this feels so different. So different. How will they know that you are my disciples? The actual missional flag that the world ought to see is the way in which we engage with each other. No man left behind. We stand by each other. We bleed for each other. We help each other out when we're hurting. We meet the needs of each other when we're going through hardship. We build real relationships with each other. We pour out our heart. We do the hard work to let God work in us through each other. We are a family. The church is a family. And you are grafted and adopted in by our Father who paid a massive price for your adoption. We are family. So what about the people at the beginning? There are a lot of lost people in this world, a lot of confused people fighting for control. They want to abuse, they're trying to follow their heart. They don't even know where their heart is leading. It leads one way for a couple of years, and their heart leads a different way for a few more years. They're literally like a boat at sea in a storm with no sail and no anchor, following appetites. Yes, we should speak out on that and go, that's not okay. Yes, there should be a social justice component. It is wrong for a man to beat women to a pulp and send them into the hospital. I don't think that's right. Right? It's wrong to kill babies in mass. Like, there are things that we should speak out against. That is true. But don't forget the John 13 text. How will they know that you are my disciples? What is the actual flagpole? All of those people who are searching, when they walk into a church, they ought to see a different kingdom, experience a whole other kind of love. They ought to see modeled selflessness and commitment and compassion. Maybe just as important as what we apologetically debate with the world, just as important is what we tangibly model for them as a family. As a family. Turn to your neighbor and say, we're family. We're family. Now, most of you did turn to your family and say that. You turn to somebody else and say, we're family. We're family. And I'm going to do my best as your pastor to help you learn to walk in the ways of love as I'm still learning to do so. Because we are a family. We're family. If you would grab the next steps card, they're in the back of the chair in front of you. I went way long today. I apologize. Actually, I kind of don't apologize. I love to preach, and I love the Word of God a ton, and I want to respect your lunch, but hey, you can fast for 20 minutes extra, right? It's okay. It's not bad for you. Pull out the next steps card. They're in the back of the chair in front of you, and I want to ask one question, but I want you to reflect on anything. So any prayer requests that you have, write them down. If you need to make a decision, maybe you're not a Christian, and you're streaming this online or watching it somewhere, I don't know, and you're going, I want that kind of love. Even in that little message, I see a different kind of kingdom, and I'm interested in that. If you want to commit your life to the Lord, mark it on there. We want to follow up with you. We want to get you in a community. If you were going, I would love to get into a small group or a discipleship group, write it on the card. We want to help you grow deeper, be deeper grafted into the family. It's good for you. It's hard, and it's good at the same time. But I also want to ask this charitable question. As you're filling that out, pause for a moment and pray, Lord, is there somebody that I need to be showing charity to? And I'm going to pray that God will bring a name to mind. Maybe it is actual family, cousin, aunt, uncle, whatever. Maybe it's somebody in your small group. Maybe it's somebody in the church. Pray, God, open my eyes. Who around me could I show charitable love to? Maybe even to a level that you actually have to build your life around it. Just spend some time before the Lord. What is He doing in your heart? Any prayer request, write it down. But also pray, Lord, is there somebody I need to be showing charitable love to? Show them to me. If nothing else, just write a name down. Maybe you need to just write out, God, open my eyes to see it. Spend some time, go ahead and write.
We just want to thank you so much for joining us online. If God's working in your heart, we would love to hear from you. Go to www.encountertrinity.com and make sure to look up our information and send us a message. We want to know what God's doing in your heart. We want you to know that you are loved by God and absolutely have a purpose.